So, risk assessment. It is the key issue really regarding regarding PPE regs and regarding the use of PPE. This is Regulation 6, before choosing, so you've got to do it before you decide what you're going to use. You've got to make sure that an assessment is carried out to determine that PPE is suitable. So again, we come back to this word suitable again. The assessment should look at the risks that you're trying to control or reduce, the characteristics of the PPE, taking into account any factors such as the people, that sort of thing, and whether, of course, that PPE is compatible with any other PPE that's being used. But Regulation 6 isn't the only regulation regarding risk assessment. So of course you've got the management regs, the Management Health Safety Work Regulations, Regulation 3.1. Every employer shall make a suitable and sufficient assessment of the risks to the health and safety of his employees to which they're exposed whilst at work. So there we've got suitable and sufficient rather than just suitable. And again, people need to be aware of how do we decide what is suitable and what's sufficient. And we'll come back to that shortly. There are other duties for employers under the regulations, and they're set out there for you. They're mainly to maintain and replace PPE as appropriate. Well, there are cost facilities there, aren't there? Because if you've got an employee who's continuously losing his PPE, what are you going to do? You're going to try and charge him for it, if it's replacement? If you do, you're on a fairly sticky wicket. But we'll come on to the employee's responsibilities shortly. You've got to provide suitable accommodation, so depending on what it is, if it's a dust mask, you need to make sure they can leave it somewhere clean. If it's glasses, you might need to make sure they've got some containers so they stop getting scratched. It's more sophisticated, and obviously you may need the employee to sign in or sign out the PPE at the beginning of the day and sign it back in at the end of the day. And the bottom one there, you've also got to provide information, instruction and training, which is the key element. And the bottom one, which I was about to come on to, it's a fairly important one. And you've got to take reasonable steps to ensure that the PPE is properly used. Now, what do we mean by reasonable steps? Well, we'll come on to that. So they're the employer's responsibilities. And have we got any trade union health and safety reps in the audience? Yeah, okay, great. Because I'm sure you're well aware of these, but sometimes employees tend to forget that they've also got duties under health and safety legislation. And from my experience, sometimes the employees are not aware of those responsibilities. They think it's always down to the management. Well, it's not the case. As far as personal protective equipment is aware, they've got to make use of that in accordance with any instruction and training that they're given. There's also a duty under the management regs along very similar lines. They've got to take all reasonable steps to ensure that the PPE is returned to the accommodation provided. So if you're providing suitable storage, they've got to make use of it. They've got to report if there's any defects or if the PPE is lost. And the last one, which comes from the Health and Safety at Work Act, so it's quite an important one, they've got to cooperate with the employer so far as is necessary to enable the employer to comply with any statutory duty. Now, that I think is really, really quite important where PPE comes in. Because if they're not cooperating with the employer, if they're not wearing their eye protection and they're injured, well potentially if they've been given suitable information, instruction and training and the employer's taking reasonable steps, well they're in breach of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Prosecutions under Section 7 of the Health and Safety at Work Act are extremely rare. In my career I only really know of one, and that was at a car plant not a million miles away from here, which has since closed. Where a supervisor instructed an employee to operate, I think it was a press brake, it didn't have any guarding on it. The employee was subsequently injured, and as a result of that, the supervisor was prosecuted under Section 7. I say it is extremely rare, but one that managers can make sure their employees are aware of. Also, of course, trade union reps can make sure their colleagues are aware that there is a duty there. So, we've set out there a summary of the responsibilities of each party. The employer's got to carry out the risk assessment, it's got to provide the PPE, have an account to that risk assessment, it's got to provide suitable information, instruction and training, and it's got to take reasonable steps, which we'll come on to as I mentioned. The employee's got to make use of it and look after it, it's got to report any defects or any loss, and of course he's got to cooperate with the employer.